Hey friends, Loss Ratio here, and welcome to this next episode of Loss Ratio Talks About Insurance while he tries to catch a fish. In the last episode, I answered one of the most common questions that I hear around the topic of self-inspection, and that is, can I trust my policyholders, or does self-inspection introduce this massive opportunity for fraud? If you haven't seen that episode yet, I encourage you to look back on my LinkedIn timeline and give it a watch. But at the end of that episode, I teased the most compelling data that we've been able to gather and capture now, having processed over 500,000 self-inspections. So let's dive into that data now.
Last year we wrapped the markets hard. Fast forward to today. Do you see any signs of...
But before I share that data with you, it's important to understand the mechanics of a self-inspection compared to a field inspection. Now, the mechanics of a field inspection are pretty straightforward, right? You send a third-party inspector out to a property, they take photos, gather information, they identify any underwriting hazards or concerns that are on a property, they gather all of the data points necessary for an accurate replacement cost valuation, and then they submit all of that data to the inspection vendor that they're working for. The vast majority of inspection vendors would then have an internal QA process, a quality assurance process, where essentially a desk reviewer double checks the inspector's work to hopefully ensure that all of that data is accurate. Now, the mechanics of a self-inspection are obviously significantly different, but really just in two specific ways. And it's really just about shifted responsibility, because obviously we're removing the inspector from the process. So where have those inspector responsibilities gone? So first and foremost, the responsibility of capturing the photos, capturing that imagery of a property has been shifted from the inspector now onto the policyholder. Policyholders being directed in a very simple step-by-step process of exactly what photos to capture. That's fairly simple and straightforward. Nearly all consumers now have a smartphone that is capable of capturing very high-quality imagery, and quite frankly, all of these same consumers are very used to snapping photos with their phones on a daily basis. We now have many millions of photos captured by policyholders and submitted through our self-inspection platform, and as I mentioned earlier, 99% of those photos taken by policyholders are of the same quality or even higher quality than any carrier would be used to receiving from a third-party inspection vendor. But what about the inspector's expertise in the field? What about the inspector's ability to identify specific underwriting hazards and concerns on the property, and also accurately identify structure features and finishes for replacement cost valuation purposes? You obviously can't ask your policyholder to identify deficiencies and hazards with their own property because, number one, as mentioned earlier, they're extremely naive and they don't even know what to look for. And number two, could perhaps even motivate policyholders to not be as honest as they would otherwise. So this is why the responsibility of hazard identification and replacement cost valuation is shifted from the inspector onto the quality assurance team. Now, these QA teams are highly trained individuals who have processed tens of thousands of inspections, and quite frankly, in most cases, they have just as much, if not more, expertise than the actual inspectors in the field. Shifting these two responsibilities off of the third-party inspector, who's no longer involved with the self-inspection, and onto the policyholder for photo capture and the QA team for hazard identification and replacement cost valuation responsibilities, you end up with a completed underwriting inspection that the vast majority of the time is actually higher quality and more valuable than a field underwriting inspection would be. Now, I know that may sound like an extremely bold statement, but let me share the data with you. We recently took the data from 50,000 field inspections completed by an independent contractor inspector out in the field and compared that data against 50,000 self-inspections completed by policyholders and our QA team. And the results of that comparison and analysis were mind-blowing. Self-inspection actually identified more hazards at a higher frequency than field inspection for both liability concerns as well as physical damage and condition concerns. And this was true across every single hazard category with one exception. So what's the one category where field inspections outperform self-inspection? I'll give you a second to think about it and guess. If you guessed roof, you're right. We're obviously not asking policyholders to climb up on their roof to take clear close-up photos, or to even climb on a ladder, or even use a selfie stick. Most inspectors in the field are using a monopod, and so they're able to get their camera up at eave level and take those clear close-up photographs of a roof. And you're just not going to get that from a policyholder. Now, with that being said, depending on the characteristics of the home, we do see some pretty darn good roof photographs on a regular basis. However, the lower the pitch of the roof, the poorer quality your roof photos are going to be taken by a policyholder from ground level. And that's just the nature of the beast. Now, I'll talk about roof and how carriers are addressing this in another episode, but let's get back to the most surprising part of this analysis. When I first saw the data, I will admit I didn't really understand it. How is it possible that when you remove the expertise from the field, you're actually identifying more hazards on a property? How is it possible that a policyholder could capture more or better imagery that would allow a QA team on the back end to identify more hazards? Are inspectors really doing that horrible of a job out in the field? Well, as I mentioned in the first episode, there is certainly a massive talent gap out in the field. However, that's not the issue here. The reason that self-inspection identifies more hazards and provides a more accurate replacement cost valuation compared to a traditional field inspection, it all comes down to two words: artificial intelligence. I'm just kidding, it's not that. But you wanted it to be, didn't you? No shade on AI, but that's not it. The two words are property access. So what do I mean by that? Well, it's extremely important to understand that of the millions and millions of property inspections that carriers are ordering from third-party inspection vendors today, the vast majority of these are ordered as exterior-only inspections. So what does that mean? Well, it means the inspector obviously doesn't go inside the home, so no interior data is captured. The vast majority of these inspections are being completed without an appointment. In other words, the policyholder doesn't have to be at the property. And based on our data and experience, around 80% of the time, policyholder's not even home when the inspection is completed. The inspector's arriving at a property, knocking on the door, no one's home, they leave a business card, and they take photographs, make some measurements of whatever portion of the property is accessible to them. And a strong majority of the time, these inspectors have very limited property access. There are gates and privacy fencing, whether locked or unlocked. Obviously, these inspectors are not going through gates onto people's property without permission. And so millions of these exterior-only property inspections are completed every year, and these inspection reports sent to carriers for underwriting. And they literally only have visibility of maybe between 50 to 75% of the property. Millions of these inspections have maybe half a dozen photos. A photograph of the front of the house, partial photos of the left and right side, depending on what the privacy fencing situation is. And that's about all you get. That's all that an underwriter has to look at. 4 or 5, maybe 6 photos if they're lucky. So most carrier homeowners' books of business have been underwritten based on knowledge and data captured of less than half of the property. They've never seen in the rear yard, they don't know what's going on back there, and they've certainly never seen the back side of the house. Now, there's certainly a whole nother topic here when it comes to aerial and satellite imagery. I'll talk about that in another episode. And while that can certainly help here, it does have major limitations and drawbacks. So hopefully the picture's becoming clear for you now. When you shift the responsibility of image capture from a third-party inspector onto the policyholder, what do you now have? Full property access. Policyholders can take photos throughout their property, interior and exterior, front and back, left and right, giving a comprehensive view of each individual property that, quite frankly, carriers have never had before. And so this is why we see more hazards identified and more accurate replacement cost valuation with self-inspection. Because with most traditional field inspections, underwriters are only getting visibility into half of a property. There we go. What liability hazards were hiding in the backyard? How many broken windows were on the backside of the house? Well, the data shows that a whole lot of these hazards and more have traditionally been hidden from underwriters' view. But now, with self-inspection, the hidden is revealed. So what does this mean? It means more accurate underwriting using self-inspection. There we go. Oh, lost him. So just imagine underwriting based off of half a dozen photos from the front side of a property.
Or would you rather have
15 to 30 photos, a 360-degree view around the exterior of a property, as well as interior photos of the home? This is the contrast today between traditional field inspections, the way they've been done for decades, and self-inspection. Now, if you made it this far, thanks so much for hanging in there. I hope this information was valuable to you. There's a whole lot more to talk about, but I'm going to save it for the next episode. Thanks for watching.
Rocket. Underwriting's the foundation to a strong and healthy book. You don't know what you can't see, but self-inspection lets you look. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the future isn't bright.